Citizens, hold on a minute.
Yeah, no.
He doesn't like barking or knocking at the door. Citizens may participate in the public hearing and citizens comment period by calling the appropriate time. The phone number to call is 844-844-9200. When prompted, enter the access code for the meeting, which is 39. Hey, Bruce, mute your phone for a minute.
Got it.
398145, followed by the pound sign. You will hear Q&A session has started. Press *6. You will hear, if you would like to speak, please press 1 to be added to the queue. Press 1. While you are in queue, you will hear an audio feed of the meeting. Wait until you are prompted by the moderator. Then you can share your comments with council. Participants are reminded that though the pre-recorded prompts refer to questions, the public hearing and citizen comment portion of the meeting are times for the council to simply hear your comments. All right. Let's move on to agenda item number 2, and that is to adopt the meeting agenda. Do we have a motion to accept the agenda or make any modifications?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I would like to adopt the agenda if we would move by.
Okay. Mr. Allen has asked for an amendment to the agenda, and that amendment is to remove item number 9, which is an appropriation ordinance to purchase police vehicles with CARES funds. Is there a second to this motion?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Mr. Short is second to this. Do we have any discussion on this matter before we take a vote? Hearing no discussion, all in favor, please signify by saying aye and give a show of your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. The next motion on the agenda is the consent agenda. Item number 3 is to consider the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as it's presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Mr. Short has made a motion to accept the consent agenda. Is there a second for this motion?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Bruce. Mr. Allen has seconded the motion. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing no discussion, all in favor signify by saying aye and a show of hands. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. All right, item number 4 is members or matters for council. Does any member of council have anything they would like to share at this time?
Mr. Mayor, I do have a few comments. I did have my constituent meeting last Tuesday, and I had a good conversation about the South River Preserve and some of the drawings and some of the plans that have been laid out online at the Parks and Rec site on the website for the city. I think they're good suggestions and good questions. I know that Dwayne has been compiling those and coming up with some answers, and I'll be meeting with him this week, hopefully to update things. And I think we may get a little bit more of a presentation here as well. But I think it's good to have lots of folks involved in asking questions about how that is going to look and how we anticipate using it. But that was the main thrust of my constituent meeting, and I was glad to hear all those questions.
Thank you, Sam. Any other matters?
Mr. Mayor, I would just offer my appreciation for the conversation that we've had. I know we've gotten a lot of citizen input this today and this morning and this afternoon about use of CARES Act funds and what options. And so I look forward to a work session where we can have the staff sort of present what with the CARES Act, what are eligible and ineligible expenditures, and more specifically, offer to our community how we've already committed funds and to the scope and scale of it. You know, we've done an appropriation. Not everything comes back through council except for large expenditures. But we did want I just want to extend that appreciation, and I look forward to that conversation. I think that'll be good for our community to understand how we have already been committing funds, what sort of the game plan is for expenditures of funds moving forward, how we support our community through the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Sam, both for comments. Next item up is item number 5, which is a public hearing rezoning property at 0 Tiffany Drive. Item number 5 is to hold a public hearing to receive comments and consider introducing an ordinance upon application by Riverbend Development on behalf of Rosser Avenue Development, LLC, to rezone 69.46 acres site at 0 Tiffany Drive from highway business to single-family residential and general and multifamily residential. Mr. Juday, I'm sorry.
You hear me all right?
Yes, sir.
Great. Let me share screen here. The application before you today is a rezoning application for what's popularly known as the Carflow Farm property. It's located at 0 Tiffany Drive, which just means it doesn't have an address. It's right behind the Grand Home Furnishing. If you're looking at a map of the city, it's located here. It's kind of this area that doesn't have very many roads, but you've got your Walmart neighborhood market here at Martin's, Grand Home Furnishings there, and it's back there between Dewitt-Rosser and West Main Street, kind of in that triangle. This is a rezoning. I talked to my planning commission a lot about sort of cards in a developer's hand that you own certain rights when you own a piece of land. So just to explain a little bit about what this process is, you saw the Quisenberry property a few months ago, and that was the exact opposite of this one. That was a subdivision that was by right. That means that they already owned the right to build those houses. There was nothing that council could vote on that would remove that right. So you weren't voting on whether or not they were allowed to build them. You were voting on whether they complied with the ordinance and the specifics of it. So we talked a lot about very specific elements of the development. This is a rezoning application, and there is no subdivision application at this time. That means they're not actually applying to build anything at the moment. So that means that we are not going to be discussing, or we don't have to deal with any of the real specifics about, you know, what width will the sidewalk be or things like that that are covered by our subdivision ordinance. What we are discussing is the entitlement. Are we going to allow change the zoning and change what it is that they're allowed to build in the future when they come with a by right subdivision? Currently, this property is in 2 sections. The middle section, the middle half or so of the property, is zoned RS12. That's single family residential 12. If you remember the Quisenberry subdivision, you'll be familiar with this zone. It allows single family homes only at a maximum density of 3.5 units per acre. Considering floodplain and steep slopes and other concerns, need for roads, you're probably looking at a realistic maximum of about 150 houses that could be built in the center of this property. This is a huge property, definitely our largest infill property in the city. So that's what could be built currently in that section. The other half of the property is currently zoned HB for highway business. This is the part along Dewitt Boulevard and the part behind Martin's Grand Home Furnishing. This allows pretty much all commercial uses and some uses that you might consider to be sort of light industrial. There is room for definitely hundreds of thousands of square feet of commercial development here. That said, other than the part on Dewitt, it's perhaps the part immediately behind Martin's. A lot of it has fairly low visibility for major corridors. So the likelihood of there being a massive big box store or something like that is fairly low. And in general, the commercial market is slow these days. But there are a number of uses that are in demand at the moment that would be allowed by the current zoning. Things like self-storage is making a lot of money at the moment. Things like towing lots, anything related to auto service, things like that. So all those uses are allowed in the HB district. So that's what their current entitlement is that they currently own. The developer's proposal is to rezone the entire property to medium and higher density residential. It'll still be in two sections, though one section will be smaller now. So the largest section of the property will be zoned RG5, general residential. This allows for a number of different types of housing. However, they're actually proffering a site plan that'll sort of specify more specifically what types of units they're going to build. And they'd like to build single family attached homes. A lot of people refer to these as duplexes. Our ordinance distinguishes between duplexes, which are 2-unit homes built on one lot. So that's often conducive to renting, and single family attached homes, which are attached 2-unit structures, but each unit is on its own separate lot. So they're generally built for sale. So for instance, the Pratt Run neighborhood is kind of an example of single family attached homes that are for sale, but they're, have a share a party wall. The other section, the smaller section, they'd like to rezone to RMF, residential multifamily. This allows apartment buildings at a density of up to 20 units per acre. And this is the same zone. RG5 is the same zone that's in most of the core city neighborhoods, all Basic City, Wayne Hills, Charleston Park, all the areas sort of around downtown. RMF is a zoning that's in a lot of our apartment complexes. And it allows something similar to, for instance, Windy Grove to be built. This is a very large property. You could theoretically pack a lot of units at these densities onto just the size of parcel. So as part of the proffer letter, they're saying that the maximum possible number of units that could be developed in this area would be 600. Part of the benefit of proffering that is they can attach that to a traffic study, which will allow for a more specific study of traffic. So it is, like I said, it's a very large property. It's a significant part of the city, and definitely an important decision to make about what should be built there. Here's the subject property with the aerial map. You can see the location of the Walmart Supercenter here, the Grand Home Furnishings and Martin's, Devante. This is the unfinished Silver Creek development up here in Bookerdale Road. So it stretches almost all the way to Bookerdale Road and over to Dewitt Boulevard. As I mentioned, they have provided a site plan. Sometimes I show you site plans associated with the rezoning, and I just say that they're conceptual site plans. That means that it's just one possible thing that could be built under the zoning. And we ask for those site plans in order to be able to demonstrate what could be built. In this case, this is actually a proffered site plan. That means that they're getting the rezoning with this site plan attached to it. So they have to build roughly in accordance with this site plan. So you're actually approving this development as you see it here, not anything that could be built in the RG5 or the RMF district. As you can see, they're showing these areas as RG5, and this area down here immediately behind Martin's as the RMF area. There's a number of things I'll draw your attention to on this site plan. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Show. First of all is the road layout. Our comprehensive plan calls for a connection across from Tiffany Drive towards the Dewitt Boulevard. In the past, we've talked about a major connector road that would go all the way to Shepherd Court, where the Zeus Theater is. In this case, over the years and working with this application, we have pressed for this developer to make a connection as part of this development. They need, for something of this size, to have at least 2 nodes onto our major corridors, and so they're providing that with this road, and this will help to distribute traffic a little bit more, disperse it a little bit more, and hopefully provide more alternative options to the Dewitt-Rosser intersection. They're also dedicating right-of-way for possible future construction of the Dewitt-Rosser connector, and I'll talk about that a bit in a minute. They'd be extending Tiffany Drive north and providing right-of-way for Tiffany Drive to be extended further north in the future if the Silver Creek development were to change in the future. At the moment, Silver Creek is shown with the connection out to Bookerdale Road rather than down to Tiffany Drive. But this would be another possible connection for them if they wanted to alter that. And the developer of this was changed with input from the owner of the property up there. They've had trouble in the past with making the connection out to Bookerdale Road. It would still be quite expensive for them to connect along this right of way, but the option is there. We also show on the comprehensive plan that Eventually, we would like to have a park along Pratt's Run in this area to serve the west end of the city. So the developer will be dedicating about 10 acres to the city for potential development of recreational facilities in the future. They're also going to construct a small pocket park as part of the RG5 zoned part of the neighborhood, but that would still be owned privately by the neighborhood association and would be maintained by the HOA. I can come back to this later if we have more questions about the site plan. Again, here's kind of the Google Earth view where it would be. The two major connections and routes into this property would be here at the Caribbean Car Wash. One of the big things that's kept this property from developing in the past is just the cost of extending roads out to Dewitt. And this developer has managed to do so by acquiring property to connect to an existing curb or an existing median break, which was designed for an entrance in this area when Dewitt Boulevard was constructed. And the other option would be here at Tiffany Drive. As you can imagine, with the rezoning of this size, the developer was required to complete a traffic impact analysis. Their TIA was completed by Ramey Kemp Associates, and I believe we have the developers brought a representative of Ramey Kemp on the line to be able to answer questions specifically about the traffic study if you have more detailed questions, and I can pull that up as well. There were a number of recommendations that came out of the traffic study, which have been incorporated into the developer's proffer letter. The first is lengthening of the queue at Tiffany Drive. The applicant will have to reconfigure lanes. We currently have 150 feet of storage in the left turn lane at Tiffany Drive, and we already back up to about 160 feet in most models. This should extend that back up to about 200, 220 feet. So as part of the application, the developer will have to reconfigure lanes at Tiffany Drive to accommodate that storage. They'll also have to construct the new road to Dewitt Boulevard. Obviously, that's been kind of the main sticking point with this development over the years. And so that will provide an additional connection there, and they'll have to build the necessary turn lanes and acquire easements for site distance there. Traffic at the new intersection was a major issue during the traffic impact analysis. They'll be adding a significant, if the development ever reaches a full build out, that would be a significant number of new cars at that intersection. And so but it is not enough to warrant a new signal there. For city staff, that's not a bad thing because that signal is too close to the low signal to meet VDOT specs anyway. And we didn't want to add another signal to our repertoire of maintenance. But if you do get to full build out, if the developer ever gets to the point where they're able to sell so many lots that they build the entire entitlement, then you would see a more significant amount of traffic at that intersection. You know, there's a possibility that far in the future, and we've specified this in the letter, that the city would reserve the right to restrict left turns out of that location. As part of what we recommended to deal with that, we'll be asking them to construct an interparcel connection to the adjacent commercial property there. So if the commercial property develops in the future, then that would provide more ways of getting in and out. And hopefully, if we're talking about the very distant future, the Dewitt-Rosser connector will be connected at some point, and there'll be an additional connection for this development that will extend all the way out to Shepherd Court. And as I mentioned, they've reserved right of way for the connector road and for the Tiffany Drive extension. As I mentioned, I can answer questions further, but I'll just pull up really quickly here the traffic study with responses from VDOT. But essentially, the traffic study is something that they construct a model of the traffic flow in that area, and then they use a maximum number of homes that are proffered, in this case, the 600, to try to calculate traffic amounts and then figure out their effects on all the adjacent intersections. And this goes into all kinds of technical stuff that we can look at later if you're interested. Back to the presentation here. This is a little bit of a wild card in this whole discussion of this area, the Dewitt-Rosser Connector Road. This was a major project of my predecessor, Michael Barnes. We've applied for smart scale money for it several times. At the moment, it just doesn't have the score to justify its cost in smart scale, so we didn't bother with applying for it this year. That said, it does score fairly well, and in the future, if there's more traffic in this area, it could be warranted. And so we're not scrapping the project. It's still there. but we're not guaranteeing developments can use it. So obviously initially different folks that have wanted to develop this property would have liked to count on this Dewitt-Rosser connector as their second entrance, but we have made them construct their own entrance to Dewitt instead. But in the future, we do hope this road will be constructed, and this developer is proffering right of way for us to help us get there. We hope if Silver Creek comes back with the replat at some point, that they'll proffer a lot of the additional right of way, and we'll get closer to where we have all of the property for it. But like I said, I'm sure that this road will come up in discussions of the traffic flow, and my recommendation would be to try to keep this road as an option, but not to count on it happening anytime soon. As far as conformance with the comprehensive plan, the land use in this area is proposed as medium and high density residential, which would supplement the existing commercial. Our comprehensive plan refers to this as mixed use area E, which calls for a mixture of commercial and higher density residential uses that transition towards the lower density residential further out and help to support the existing commercial at exit 94. So we feel that this rezoning matches roughly what we want. It doesn't include any additional commercial uses, but we feel that area is already, overly commercial. And what we need to balance that out is residential development. Also in the comprehensive plan, you'll notice this little asterisk here. And we have those asterisks on our comp plan land use map as the locations of potential recreational areas. There are parts of the city where we don't have great recreational spaces currently. And so the developer will be proffering 10 acres of land to the city for future recreational uses there. And then we also show that a big priority is road connections, particularly the extension of Tiffany Drive to somehow connect to Dewitt Boulevard. And I'll just pull up from our comprehensive plan land use guide, mixed use E, which is this area right here, which is the Carflow property, calls for commercial, retail, various residential housing types, parks, and open space. An extension of Tiffany Drive to connect to Rosser Avenue and Dewitt Boulevard is essential to the development of this area. Through rezoning and the development review process, encourage developers to integrate 2 or more uses in this location to provide a transition between the commercial centers and the residential neighborhoods, meet a variety of area needs, for instance, high density housing choices, and minimize vehicle trips between uses. So as our staff recommendation, we are recommending approval, believing that the proposal is consistent with the city's desired land use on the land use map, and that it's better than the existing use. So existing, we have highway business, which we already feel that there's too much commercial zoning in the city, and also plenty of commercial use in this area, and then low density residential. The medium and higher density residential uses better match the aspirations of our land use guide and provide a needed housing type that's currently heavily in demand in the city. We feel that they have sufficiently mitigated their traffic impacts and provided a satisfactory traffic study to VDOT and to the city staff. And in terms of where we want housing, this is where we would say we want it. You're going to have rezonings don't necessarily affect the growth of the city. You're going to have about 80 or so new households every year in Waynesboro. And so the question is, where do they go? And we feel that with the current demand for this housing type, that this is the better location for it versus other spots that we've looked at, where it would be further out. This is an infill site, so you're not talking about a significant extension of public infrastructure to accommodate this new housing. That makes it a fairly efficient kind of development for the city infrastructure to handle. And also it provides us with more housing that's right around our densest commercial areas. So hopefully that reduces vehicle trips in the long run versus those people living, further out in the county or up in the Evershire, Claybrook type of area and driving more. And we feel that this is the area that's called for by the comp plan. So for that reason, we recommend approval. I'm happy to answer any questions. We have the developer available to answer questions and then public comment.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Juday?
I actually do have a question. Given the concerns of the increased traffic on Rosser, what type of impact to traffic will the apartments have in that area?
Yes, it depends on what you think will happen currently. So if you're looking at the current zoning and thinking that there will be a massive commercial development in that HB zoning, then residential, a decrease in traffic. But versus nothing happening right now, it's definitely an increase in traffic. The traffic study gives us pretty good numbers about how much we can expect on each of our corridors. Yeah, I would expect something of an increase. Now, we, through traffic studies and through proffers that mitigate whatever traffic impacts happen, ensure that traffic still flows. So I feel confident in saying that, we'll not experience a loss of service or have significant delays for residents. But you'll definitely see more cars out there.
Luke, I actually had a question as well. If you can put the map back up that had sort of the scheme of the neighborhood there. It's a little hard to tell. I can't make it any bigger from where I am. Are those,
Which part?
is that mock trees around the road there?
Yes. Mhm.
And so this
Yeah,
doesn't show the housing density in any way.
Yeah, actually, I do have a drawing that shows that, and it gives you a better visual of that. Let me see here. That's not it. Okay, sorry, this is a scan, so it's not quite as good. But here's a better visual of what that housing could look like. So here you have your attached single-family units. Again, notice that they're like duplexes. They share a party wall, but they're each on their own lot. And then here's what your apartment building configuration might look like.
Nothing's showing up, Luke.
I was about to say, we're not seeing any changes.
Sorry, I'm not sharing the wrong screen here. Share. Better?
Okay. Yeah, that gives us a better understanding of what we're talking.
Great. Sorry. Yeah, I should have showed that one. So you can see this is kind of what your footprints of apartment buildings likely look like, and roughly what footprints of housing would look like.
So Luke, the blue, are those the single family homes, or are they the duplexes?
I don't think there's any distinction between the blue and the tan here. I think that's just the developers maybe looking at different models or something. But you can kind of see how these are attached. See how they're all kind of share a wall here, but how they're each on their own lot. That's what the single family attached means. So it's all the same housing type across here.
Okay.
That give you a good sense of scale?
Yes, it does. Thank you. The other question I had, and that's a great map that you got right there. What do we anticipate with stormwater and with the creek that runs through there? And how is that going to impact that land usage? I mean, it looks like it's on the periphery there, kind of.
Yeah, and they've just shown these stormwater management facilities in roughly where you would expect them to be eventually located, which is near the low parts of the property. That we don't have to deal with a whole lot with the rezoning because it's handled during the subdivision ordinance process. But they'll have to follow all the stormwater regulations, which require them to handle both their quantity and their quality. So there can't be any additional water running off into the creek more than there is right now from the greenfield development. And so they'll have to build sufficient infrastructure to handle that runoff and drain it there, as well as filter any possible pollutants from the road, the hard surfaces that they're constructing.
Okay.
And that's true of all developments now. That's been phased in over the last few years under the Chesapeake Bay Act, and it's now the case, and any new development has to do that.
Okay. All right. That was my question. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Luke, I've got a couple of questions for you. First one would be, what is the cross section of the Tiffany Drive roadway? And the reason I ask is for bike and ped accommodations. There are currently sidewalks over by Wildwing. And it's hard to make out off of that. It looks like there may be sidewalks, but short of there we go.
Yes. So they're showing sidewalk. Actually, they'll have to do 5-foot sidewalk here. This is an error, but yeah, they're sidewalk on both sides. The main reason that we asked for the cross section in the rezoning is that we're asking for them to maintain the existing width of Tiffany. The width of the other roads and the the cross section of the roads will be determined by whatever the city subdivision ordinance is at the time that they develop it. So if they develop it in 10 years, we want it to conform to whatever our standards are at the time. But the Tiffany Drive one we asked for specifically because Tiffany is wider than our current requirement, and we want to make sure that the Tiffany Drive is extended consistently, and also can accommodate more traffic in the future if it does become connected to the Dewitt-Rosser connector. But yeah, it'll have to have sidewalk and 36 feet of pavement and so forth. Your question was specifically about sidewalk? Sorry.
Well, no, it was really just to understand the transition between the cross sections, and then,
yes,
and then how, with 1,200 to 1,500 people living in 600 units, what is that? How are we accommodating that neighborhood access? Again, the attractiveness of a higher density development here is access to employment and access to the affordability, that convenience. And there's sort of a statement of regarding park access. There's really not a whole lot of content relative to non motorized travel.
Yeah, so like I said, because it's not a subdivision, we just decided to operate under the assumption that we'll use whatever subdivision ordinance is in place when it actually develops. This is if there are additional things that you'd like them to specifically call out, could discuss that. But I feel that our subdivision ordinance is fairly robust and pretty good for we've been making all new developments include sidewalk and pedestrian accommodations everywhere.
I was thinking that maybe I was thinking maybe one idea would to perhaps consider assigning one side or the other. I don't care if it's on the ordinal north side, or I guess what we're looking at, east or west side of Tiffany, to maybe consolidate that to a shared use path on one side. It'll reduce our long-term maintenance cost, a little more flexibility to engineer the road. And then for the connector road from Tiffany to Dewitt, maybe I'd be interested and curious how, once you get out that shared use path, how families are going to be able to navigate those neighborhoods. And I think a shared use path could be, again, an attractive element. It's consistent with what we're trying to do to infill more established neighborhoods in the city and providing bike and pet accommodations. So that would be, I think, just of interest for me.
I agree. That was actually, and I actually make that comment to all subdivisions that our ordinance allows for you to build a 8-foot multi-use path on one side rather than sidewalks on both sides, and that we recommend that option. The developer declined to put that into their drawings or their proffer, but obviously we can't ask them to do anything specifically, but you can vote for or against whatever development you think provides what's needed. But it's I agree with you. I like the shared use path. I do think that kind of shift is enough of a detail that it could be worked out at the subdivision phase, and that how wide sidewalks are and whether they're required on one side or both sides and so forth is something that's mainly a subdivision matter. But if you wanted to know that now with the proffer, that would make sense to discuss now.
Yeah, I think it's an important thing that we ought to consider, just so that, again, what we're trying to do is provide predictability for our development community. I think up front, with everyone's sort of expectations of how you're going to get 1,200, 1,500 people moving around a new subdivision, new neighborhood, I think is an important element that ought to be a consideration.
Yeah, I will just say if you'd like to create predictability and think that that's an important enough thing in the future, we might consider adding that to our subdivision ordinance more explicitly, so that it's required up front rather than just an option.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would love to explore that as an option, but relative to, again, one of the largest remaining rezonings in the city, I think that would be an important element for us to consider. Other ideas I had was the Tiffany. I'm sorry, not the Tiffany, but the connector roadway. The Dewitt-Rosser. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the typical on there I saw was 60 foot. And I recall in discussions with Mr. Barnes is that we had sort of just set that as a fixed right of way or as part of conceptual plans, but no one had actually ever evaluated whether or not you could build anything in 60-foot right of way. And I think pretty quickly we found that you can't really build anything in 60-foot right of way because of the side slopes and where stream beds are and otherwise. So I would appreciate it, maybe another examination. I think some areas actually it could be of a variable width. Maybe that's the way to sort of bite the apple out of here. Variable width to again, you're cutting into open space, not being used otherwise, but a variable dedicated to facilitate that would be awesome. Unless that's already in the proffer.
It's not, but the proffer is written vaguely enough that I think that we could accommodate that request. Again, the development should be built in general accord with the concept plan, which gives us sort of a lot of leeway in our interpretation of how that works out. So I think you're probably right. I'm not sure that we have to make them change the proffer now. But
okay, cool. I just want to make you aware that I think
that's a good thought. Yeah. It's also helpful that it's adjacent to the parkland that we're also getting proffered as well.
Yeah. So, that's a good transition. So, so it's noted in their proper conditions of 10 acres of park space, but that's really 10 acres of open space.
Correct.
But not complete. It doesn't appear from the topography an entirely accessible or usable 10 acres. So, I mean, the quality of the 10 acres. It looks like from the concept plan, the pocket park at a minimum of a half an acre, that appears to be the only park space, open space that's accessible to the families that is sort of realized out of it. And again, the minimum terminology could result in a minimum of a half of an acre for 1,500 people. I guess I have some reservations to that. It's one thing to get open space and throw a figure of 10 acres. It's another one to say, what's the quality of that acreage, and is it actually usable? And I also worry about our ability to create open space, usable, whether it's a half an acre or an acre or 5, and then having to then look to all taxpayers and finance park amenities to create some sort of active recreation, whether it's a playground or otherwise. Those aren't cheap. Having fundraised for a couple of schools here in the city for playgrounds, they are not cheap. They're getting more expensive. That gives me pause too, that we'd be committing to a half an acre or more, 1,500 folks, 1,500, and then left to finance park amenities. So that's all I had for the group.
Actually,
I guess
follow-up
ahead,
question. Well, so my understanding is tonight's presentation and tonight's public hearing is about the rezoning, not specifically about the plat, though, right?
Correct. Yeah. So they are proffering that will have to be in general accord with this layout.
Okay.
But it's not, the roads aren't, the exact locations aren't fixed, exact widths or that sort of thing. It would be in conformance with whatever our subdivision ordinance requires at the time that they choose to subdivide.
Gotcha.
So we don't want to get into a situation like we have with some other subdivisions where we approve a subdivision, in the 90s, and then they come to finish it in 2010, and now we require sidewalks and all other kinds of things.
Anyone else have any other questions for Mr. Jude?
I would just sort of echo, I think, just building on Sam's comment there, I think that just sort of reinforces my my pause of I would like to, you know, general conformance to is appreciated. But again, to manage expectations, I think on both parties, again, creating you know, through the rezoning process and accounting for those things within reason as part of proffered conditions, I think again enhances predictability for both the developer and builds expectations of what, again, ultimately those unit costs are going to have to be. And then also it just provides predictability and predictability for the city and taxpayers of what our back end costs may be to facilitate the balance of the site.
I'll let the developer, you know, respond whatever they want to your comments. The only things I'll throw in from the staff side are, you know, we have, if there are things that you'd like to see in developments in general, we can definitely amend the subdivision ordinance, and they don't have a subdivision application in front of us now. So you have time to do that. And so if there are things that council really feels needs to be in developments in general, that's where we should really have, you know, and that affects even our currently zoned by right subdivisions. And so we should definitely think about that. On the parkland thing, I'll just say that I would look at the pocket park as serving the development itself, and the homeowners association, like I said, will own that and maintain it. And if it's, you know, if you don't feel that it's large enough, you don't feel it's large enough, the area to be dedicated for the city is, you know, as Terry mentioned, it's not very developable land. It's lower land along the creek, but that's also tends to be where we put recreational land is along, you know, natural features and spots that aren't necessarily as great to be developed. And you're right that, yeah, it is expensive to develop those, but, you know, we felt it was more reasonable for them to spend their money developing the amenity that serves their neighborhood, and then just provide us with the space that, you know, if it's going to be a citywide amenity, that it's not necessarily something we put on a developer.
All right, any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry. one more thing.
Pop in.
Is this is just really more for I think as we jump into public comment and otherwise, just as a reinforce a statement that I heard you make and I think is on point, is that the by right use out there today would generate a whole heck of a lot more traffic than what's being contemplated through this development. Is that correct?
That's correct. As I mentioned, there's always a question of what will practically happen, because like I said, there's not a lot of demand currently for commercial. But I mean, it's also not like they're going to build 600 units tomorrow. You know, most subdivisions are selling units at a rate of 10 or 20 a year. So this is a long-term project like all of our subdivisions. But you're correct. Yeah, the current by right HB use, if you were to put a Costco back there or whatever, that's double the traffic already. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you. That's all I have, Bob. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Terry. Good comments and questions. With that, let's open the public hearing. And my sheet here says staff will facilitate the calls. Let me read the number again for the phone calls for those that want to participate in the public hearing. If you want to participate in the public hearing, the number to call is 844-9200. When prompted, enter the access code for the meeting, which is 39814-5, followed by the pound sign. You will hear Q&A session has started. At that time, you will hit the star, followed by the number 6. You will hear, if you would like to speak, please press 1 to be added. Once you press 1, you will enter the queue and you will hear the audio feed of the meeting. Wait until you are prompted by the moderator, then you can share your concerns with council. Miss Ashley, are you here for the builder?
I am.
You are. Would you like to start us out?
I would love to. Good evening,
All right.
person and city councilors. Thank you so much for organizing this Zoom meeting so we can all get together tonight, and really appreciate Mr. Juday's presentation of our development. It was very, very thorough, and I don't think I could do a better job myself, but I did want to just a few minutes telling you about our company, Riverbend Development. We're over in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I also have the president of our company on this evening, Mr. Alan Taylor, and then Carl Holtgren of Ramey Kemp and Associates. Our traffic engineer is also on the line if we need to get in deep into the traffic impact analysis at any time. But Riverbend, based in Charlottesville, we've been around since 1995, and our company was started by Corn Capshaw, and he's best known as the manager of the Dave Matthews Band. But we spend our time doing the development side of his company, and really since that time, we've created over 1 million square feet of commercial and mixed-use spaces. Thousands of lots and thousands of apartments. And we really love working in the communities and with the communities. And we're long-term folks here, and plan to leave a legacy in this area. So we're excited to work with you. And Mr. Short, I'll just say I really appreciate your commentary and analysis of the property. I really agree with looking at things right now, and we're really open to suggestions. So I think your idea of the mixed use path, in particular along Tiffany Avenue, it's just recently that we were talking to some of the surrounding developers and really put in that continuation of Tiffany. So I think that really opens our mind to a new way of thinking of what that right of way could and should be. And once you get in connected with the nice natural areas along Pratt's Run, I could see that being like a great multi-use path. And then you have some type of trail system that goes along the natural areas. So I think, whatever we need to do to make that consideration part of it, whether it's just some type of acknowledgement, we're happy to make that update. So I think that's great. But so our company's owned this land since 2007. It's taken us a long time to figure out. It certainly is a puzzle piece in between a lot of other properties, a lot of other uses in the city. And it's taken us a long time to negotiate the access up to Lou DeWitt, which we understand is very important in creating the proper connections in this part of the city. And, I love that we can plat all these other potential future connections so we're set up for a bunch of different scenarios as other properties also develop, and it truly can create a network there. But we feel like the uses we're proposing make a lot of sense based on the land use vision for this area, the existing uses and amenities that are available, and then the existing lower density residential neighborhoods. We think that by having more of a villa product on a lot of this land, it allows you to achieve a somewhat higher density while also we provide really beautiful opportunities for home ownership and a real neighborhood feel. And as Mr. Jude mentioned, there's part of the property that's also zoned for multifamily potentially. And, you'll notice in our concept plan that area is a lot more vague compared to the other single family attached area. And I think that's because the RMF zoning allows for all the other residential use types. So, if things are going well with a certain use type, we may not end up with apartments there. So we want to keep that really open to both options. And I will say that if apartments do end up going in the multifamily area, all of our apartment complexes are self-amenitized. So they would have the features such as the pool and the play areas and that type of thing in that area as well. So you would have the neighborhood park, the apartments area would have their own amenities available. And then you'd have the natural area along Pratt's Run that is preserved. And quite frankly, I don't think you would want to do a lot of development in that area for, I think it's nice as a natural amenity and trail space and whatnot, but we're intentionally keeping all of our development away from those sensitive environmental areas so they can stay as they need to be. So those are my main points. If there are other questions we can answer, we're just really happy to finally get the plan to this point. And we're excited to work with you and in your community.
Thank you, Ms. Davies. Are there any callers on the line, Mike?
Mr. Mayor, we do have a number of callers on the line. I think we have 12 individuals that are currently in queue for citizen comment. We don't know until we get started if these folks are calling in on this topic or general citizen comment. So council may want to make a decision as to whether you're just going to take all comment as they are. May look for a little help from Ms. Michelson as to whether we do that or whether you're going to have to tell someone if they've called for general citizen comment that they'd have to call back. Just trying to head off a problem before we encounter it, if we encounter it.
Ms. Michelson?
It's up to council, but I believe just to facilitate people calling and public participation, it may be easier to take every one of the 12 as we have them and allow them to speak on this public hearing, or if they just have a public comment in general, so as to avoid further confusion and then maybe miss a call and having somebody to call back and try to get back in the queue later on for another public hearing or another public comment.
Well, we need to take a vote on whether we want to do it this way.
Just in general, discuss what everyone's preference is and decide.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any objections if we take the calls as they come in?
I have no objection. I would remind callers, though, that we will have our regular public comment period at the end of our meeting so that they don't feel the need to get into the line right now if it is general public comment, that we will still.
And if you're calling in reference to the agenda item number 9 for the police vehicles and the CARES Act, that has been removed from our agenda tonight. It's no longer a topic that we're going to discuss tonight. So if that's why you're in queue, maybe you'll want to come back to another meeting on that one. All right, with that, let's go ahead and start taking the calls, Mr. Shaw.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, the first comment we have actually came to us online, and I'll ask Mr. Juday to read that, and then we'll start in on the telephone list.
Thank you. This is a letter that's addressed from Mr. Mike Bailey from Davis Road in the city. He says, my name is Mike Bailey and I live in the Walnut Grove Farm neighborhood. I have a couple of concerns about the rezoning of 0 Tiffany Drive. First, I want to state that I agree that it should be rezoned to residential. I have a problem with it being rezoned to multifamily units due to the following concerns. My first concern is the traffic. Rosser Avenue already has a lot of traffic due to Walmart, Martin's, and other various businesses. What will the city do to make sure we do not have gridlock with the increase in housing units? The developer's research estimated that 3,500 vehicles go through Tiffany Drive per day. What is going to happen when they add 600 units? They also stated that 12,000 vehicles drive on Rosser Avenue per day. Traffic is already heavy in the morning and afternoon. Adding 600 units will not make it any better. My second concern is the wastewater and sewer issue. The land they want to develop on is wet and marshy. How will the developer deal with the runoff with high-density residential units? How will they protect the existing ecosystem and historic Pratt's Run Creek? It would be terrible if all the wildlife were displaced due to this development. Our neighborhood is unique. I would describe it as a country living in the city. It would be a tragedy for this special charm to be destroyed. My last concern is the integration of the existing neighborhood. As of right now, the existing surrounding communities are all zoned for RS7 and RS12 single-family homes. The advent of multifamily high-rises will take away the charm and character of the existing surrounding neighborhoods. What will the city and developer do to ensure the integration into the existing neighborhood? Thank you for your consideration, Mike Bailey. All right.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, we'll go to callers.
Okay, are we putting a 3-minute time limit on the callers?
Actually, we allow 4 minutes for public comment,
Okay,
but yes, sir, we will be timing.
Q&A session has started.
is anyone on?
We're putting them in.
Yes, this is Chanda McGuffin. I'm at 644 Edwardian Lane, Waynesboro. Can you all hear?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead, Miss McGuffin.
Okay. So we've been sitting on this call for about an hour now, and it is so unprofessional. There is so much noise and so much comments. You guys couldn't get on the call. You couldn't set it up. Don't know if you're live. Don't know if we can see you. I'm not understanding why you all are not meeting in person, just like you're sending the kids back to school. I know you're not over the school board and all this other stuff you're going to say. This is a community issue that these kids are going back to school. Now, if you can't meet in person because you're scared of getting the virus, why do you think it's okay to send teachers and students back into the school system because of the virus is out? They shouldn't have any concern over that. I'm not understanding why you all are not meeting in person. You already had a transparency issue to begin with. We already had a transparency issue before the pandemic. And now you guys are having a call meeting last week to talk about $750,000 for police cars, to buy police cars. And then because of some heat today, you all took it off the agenda and said you're going to do it in a work session. Well, that's still a lack of transparency. That's a lot of money. You have hurting citizens out here. You have hurting small businesses out here. For you to go and say you're going to talk about spending $750,000 on police cars. I know you took it off the agenda, but it's not off the table for us. That's not logical to do that. That's mismanaging of that money. That's misguidance of that money. And you don't want to move it into a general fund so you can do what you want to do with it. No, that's not acceptable. And you can't even have a meeting, a professional meeting. There is so much technology out here, and you all are having a meeting like this. You got dogs barking, kids screaming. You don't know how to mute the phone. You don't know how to mute yourself on Zoom. Come on, guys. Y'all can do better than this. This is 2020 with technology, and you can't handle it. You guys can't handle a simple contingency plan of what happens in the city. What if that had happened to us in Stanton, happened here in Waynesboro? We got a river run right through the city. You guys need to do your job, what you were voted for, and care about the entire city, not just one part of the city. Y'all are only concerned about out there at Rosser by Walmart. That's the only place you're concerned about in this city. Y'all can't do business and you couldn't find money and you don't have money, you don't have this, but you all can find money and do some things that you want to do in that one area. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable.
Have you completed your comment, ma'am?
For now, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw, do we have someone else up?
Yes, we do, sir. The next speaker should be able to go.
Speaker, you can start your comment. Sure, I'm still in queue, Mr. Shaw.
Still in queue there, Mr.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello? It's saying that I can talk, yet nobody's responding.
Okay, we can all hear. If you want to go ahead and state your name and your concern.
Yeah, I can. My name is Guy Carter. I am a citizen in Waynesboro, Virginia. I've been getting together with several citizens to hold rallies to try to promote, as Ms. McGuffin was saying, more communication between all the citizens and the people in charge. I concur with Ms. McGuffin that it was very disrespectful, A, for you to wait all the way through us having to listen out the rest of that, for you all to make us listen to all that before you said that you had taken that off the table. However, even though that was taken off the table, I still have questions, and I want to know what are the provisions for the on the CARE Act funding. I also want to know how many police cars are there are we currently working with in the city. I also want to know how many are driven per shift currently in the city and how many officers are on duty per shift in the city. I want to know why our children and the citizens that are in the meekest of positions right now during this pandemic are still having to deal with the issues of being put second to being police. We're worried more about policing and turning funds over to that department than we are about putting it into our citizens, which is where that funding should go. The police already have funding for what they need, but the citizens, however, during this pandemic don't have funds for what they need to do. And if it's a big issue about them being in cars and all that together, well, you needed to check your city workers that you all were having work in the same vehicles within 6 feet of each other and then being terminated from their positions when they are coming up sick. But back to what we do need to be concerned about is, however, getting internet maybe citywide. I was seeing something earlier where somebody was speaking on an internet that is mobile so that children that are not in homes that have the internet, and there are families that cannot even afford the $9 internet, so that is available and up and running 24 hours a day. That's where those fundings need to be. Our college students, our children, and our workers that are in homes that need to have those. We need to have internet throughout the city for everyone in every area. We need to be, if we have such a large amount of money, we need to be making sure that all the children have computers, that they are able to use, they have desks that they can work from, that they have the pencils that they need in their homes. During this crisis right now, there are families that don't have money to go buy back to school items that they need. Why isn't it something being done about that? It needs to be something being done about the kids being fed more properly. If you have money for police to drive around in, then you have money for these bus drivers to be getting paid to drive these meals throughout the communities so that all the children and elderly are still being fed. That's where your concern should be. And what I suggest that we as citizens need to do is we need to create a committee to police you all. because evidently the city council has more higher end people and concerned than they do the low and the meek of the city. And that's sad. It's very sad for us to be worried about adults that have and worried about providing more cars to be policed, for police to do policing in. And are we creating jobs for police that we need these more cars? Because it's a multitude of cars still just sitting on them lots every day, and police just sitting in parked vehicles, getting air conditioned under the shade trees every day that we can see as we drive around. So if we have the funding for that, then I'm sure we can put it into feeding these children. And if you all can't do the job that needs to be done, and if the citizens of the city is not where you're concerned and you're more concerned with the policing efforts of the city, then we need to take up some kind of special counsel so that we can make sure that you all don't stay in that position for too much longer. Because if you don't care about the people of the city, then you don't need to be in the positions that you're in. And I turn over my time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Another caller there, Cameron. Two more callers, Mr. Mayor.
No more callers?
We do have two more callers.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me?
Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is A.J. Young, and I am a citizen of Waynesboro. My concern reflects the last two callers. We are in the midst of the worst pandemic that we have seen in over 100 years. I find it appalling that the city of Waynesboro, through the CARES Act, reallocate dollars to the general fund to buy 9 police vehicles when we have people in this community who are hurting, who are hungry, who are making tough decisions whether or not to pay their rent or to buy medicine, whether they're going to be able to afford to live from one day to the next. And for us to reallocate money from the HEROES Act to the general fund to be able to buy 9 police cruisers, when we have administrators in the school system, we have teachers in the school system, and parents who are doing their due diligence and being safe as possibly can be in wearing masks and doing things that they don't normally or would not normally have to do, but because of this pandemic, they're having to make concessions, having to do things to be able to survive. We can't ask police officers to continue to be safe, wear masks, sanitize their hands, and double up in a cruiser when everybody at this point is making sacrifices. So my question for the council is, when are you going to convene again about this allocation of $750,000 for police vehicles when we are in the midst of the worst crisis of our lifetime, and we're talking about buying police vehicles? Ma'am, sir, that is completely ridiculous. As of late, as of this past weekend, Stanton has had the worst flood that they have seen in years. We have an infrastructure problem in Waynesboro in downtown. 3 to 5 years ago, downtown, Tim Spears, his music place and all those areas, Ming Garden, downtown, were flooded because we have issues in this city. That's just one item that we could address, notwithstanding the fact that we have kids, we have teachers, we have administrative staff, support staff that is going to put themselves at risk to go back into a school system while we have COVID-19 numbers that are on the rise. I'm asking you all to rethink this. If you want to continue to have some semblance of a relationship with the citizens in this community to where we think you might be thinking about our best interests, I'm asking you, I'm imploring you, I am telling you, you need to withdraw this allocation of $750,000 from the HEROES Act, from the CARES Act rather, to the general fund, because it just doesn't make sense. not in the midst of what we are seeing as the worst situation in our lifetime. Surely you can see that those monies can be appropriated in places that can build up this community and be a beacon to this community, rather than having all of the citizens, and I'm saying all of the citizens, suggest that you all are not doing your job. So please think about that, consider that, and let us know when you're going to have the next open session, because we're going to be there to voice our opinion about this situation. Because it's a travesty. In a town of 22,000 people, we're spending $750,000 on a police force, and we got a tank that probably hasn't moved in 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Shaw, who's next?
I believe we have one more caller.
Yes, can you all hear me? There's a time delay between the phone and the computer.
No, we can hear you fine.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Katchmar. My wife and I currently live on Parker Heights Road, a quarter of a mile from the zoning site. We have a significant interest in this because if you go back to your map, if you went 4 inches to the right, that's where we live. If you go to the north of the proposed community, we own the 10 acres along Bookerdale Road from Lou DeWitt down to the single lane bridge. Right. We have several issues against an opposing high density zoning. The first would be the road proposal, and you touched on it earlier, where it would come around to the north, cross Bookerdale, and then it would tie into Lou DeWitt. That proposal, and I know it's a proposal, is absolutely undoable. If you look at those checkered marks, that is an existing, functioning, full-service church. Just to the left, those blue lines on all of this map is actual water. Where Lou DeWitt meets Bookerdale, that is storm drainage that goes along Bookerdale, goes under the single lane bridge, which consistently floods. That proposed road is a no-go to start with. You would have to demolish the church and completely rebuild Bookerdale Road to support that. The church is a Central Baptist church. One of the 10 acres that the subdivision is proposing giving to the city, those blue lines are blue lines. That entire 10 acres is swamp. If the city's okay taking swamp, then that's fine. But that's not actually good for the city. They look like they're giving you something. I know this area well. I have walked every inch of it. The traffic pattern, that it had to be 28 pages that I reviewed in all of this, is extremely flawed. The traffic pattern is contingent on 4 accesses into the community. 2 of them are not viable. One to the south that goes on to Rosser, the one that goes to the north that goes to Lou DeWitt. So every bit of that traffic study is wrong. The access that goes to the northeast through the commercial area that comes out of the car wash is viable. Someone asked earlier if the blue houses on the map were single family. According to the legend, they are. Now, if you go with a standard, and we have to just use averages here, of a 4-person family with 600 units is 2,400 people. Is the city able to take 1,200 new students? The answer is no. 1 high school and 1 middle school. It's absolutely not doable for high density. Now, if we looked at building fewer homes in that area, low density to mid density, then that may be doable with the 2 access points. Other than that, I don't have any other comments, but like I said, my wife and I bought 10 acres to the north of the property along Bookerdale Road. That is our 10 acres of retirement property to put a single house. So to put something behind us is a great concern to us, especially high density. Does anyone have any questions for me? I live a quarter of a mile from this proposed community. I've lived here 15 years. Anybody have a question for me or comment for me?
Sir, this is just citizen comment. We're not permitted to ask questions or comments.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time now that we got back on the subject of zoning.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you for your comments tonight.
One more. We do have additional callers, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, yeah. Can you hear me? My name's Andrea Jackson. I'm from 401 Avenue. And I wanted to make a comment, and I know it's not at the right time, but I find, and I agreed with the other people, that it's hypocritical that the city council could not meet because of COVID, but that they could send the schools to start school next week, and the school board has been meeting since June. I know that at the beginning, then when you had Jeannie on there, she had concerns about it, but now it's getting to be August, and y'all are the leaders of the city, and y'all should be in the forefront, showing an example. And if it's not safe for y'all to meet, how is it safe for the schools or for the kids to go back to school? And also, it causes mass confusion. If we was in a city council meeting, you could have the people comment at the proper times. We could be there. I think that y'all are continuing to have these meetings online so that you don't have access, that we don't have access, because it's hard for people to come and call and make comments, because people haven't been making comments until y'all done something that has generated people to come and make comments, because they're so angry about what's going on. And the simple fact is that y'all aren't being transparent, and y'all aren't being accessible to the people, and you're not doing what the citizens is concerned about. And the simple fact is that, yeah, y'all took off the thing about the $750,000 for the police vehicles off of this meeting, but if we hadn't signed in today, y'all might have still had it. Now you're putting it into a work session that we may not be able to see, and we don't understand what's the next steps of what's going on, and why would you even do that? For me, I'm personally insulted that y'all would even put that amount of money for police cruisers in this political climax. When people are there's a movement to defund the police, that Waynesboro would have the audacity to put more money into the police force when there's other ways that could better help the community. And I would like to see that the city council meetings immediately be made public. Y'all need to do better and figure out a way how to do social distancing and be accountable to the citizens. And on that note, my comments is ended.
Thank you, ma'am.
We do have an additional caller, sir.
Okay. Caller of the line.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Dwight Williams, and I'm at 2818 Jefferson Lane here in Waynesboro. I've been listening to all these callers call in. The big reason for me calling is I want to call in to support our city council. I think you all are doing a fantastic job, a phenomenal job. I believe you all have been transparent in the decisions that you've made. I applaud you all for removing item number 9, funding the police vehicles, mostly because I think the money can be used in other ways to support our community, whether it's for businesses that are being shut down or need assistance in the in view of this pandemic. I do support our police officers 100%. I do believe that more cruisers are necessary to effect better law enforcement in our community, but I do applaud you for removing that item initially, maybe to be used to help other people. I've been watching all of you guys. You all are being very ultra professional online. I know this has been a very tough time with this pandemic. I definitely look forward to seeing each of you in session in person. And as a resident here, I do understand the reasons behind you wanting to stay online for now. But thank you all for your service. Thank you all for your commitment and for your support of our community here in Waynesboro. And with that, that is the end of my comments. I hope you each have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Cameron?
Q&A session is over.
Okay. The public hearing is now closed. And I will open the floor to a motion to accept the ordinance presented tonight for rezoning of six.
Are we accepting the ordinance? Or are we voting on the ordinance tonight?
Well, we're voting to accept the ordinance, and then it'll be held over for our August 24th meeting.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure we were using the same terminology.
Yes, sir. So is there a motion to introduce the ordinance tonight, rezoning 69.46 acres of 0 Tiffany Drive from highway business to single family residential or general and multifamily residential?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Terry. Is there a second on the motion?
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Sam. This ordinance will be carried over until our August 24th regular business meeting, where it'll be considered at that time.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just interject just a couple of things prior to moving off the subject. If I could ask, be appreciated if Mr. Jade and staff, if you could maybe prepare a summary of the items that were brought up this evening and for our deliberation prior to a formal vote. We appreciate it. And actually, I had one more thing that I forgot to mention that the caller mentioned that I talked to staff earlier today, and please slipped my mind. I'm glad they brought it up. It's the student population. In the staff report, there wasn't a doesn't appear that the school division had an opportunity to weigh in on what potential impact the subdivision and those additional students might offer. I know we've had a reduction and a loss of students, as many communities have across the country. But I think just to afford them that opportunity, again, it's one of the largest subdivisions for residential we'll have probably in our service, and would appreciate the opportunity for the schools to weigh in on that.
Thanks. We actually did contact the school system. I'm sorry that wasn't in the staff report, but we do contact the school system with any large rezoning. And yes, they've mentioned that they've had declining enrollment, not related to COVID. You know, prior to COVID, they're generally decline in enrollment, and the rough pace of growth currently is allowing them to about keep a level number of students. So yeah, we don't anticipate. And again, we have plenty of areas in the city that are zoned for residential right now. Just because you're changing the zoning here doesn't mean there'll be 600 houses tomorrow. So I think that with the anticipated growth, we have plenty of capacity in the school system.
Yeah, I know there's been a long running issue about concerns of overcrowding at Westwood, and so that
sure.
So I appreciate that. That'd be great. It'd be great if we could maybe formalize that, just so we have a record in the minute of that either this evening or that the school signed off.
I can insert that into the staff report. And you wanted us to summarize whatever changes to do. So I mean, this isn't a conditional thing. We can't put conditions on them, but to the extent that the developer, when she spoke, agreed to some of the things that you mentioned, we can get her to formalize that as an addendum to the proffer letter, maybe.
That would be amazing. Yeah, I appreciate the receptiveness to that. Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you all. That brings us to item number 6, and Item number 6 is to hold a public hearing to receive comment, to consider adopting a resolution approving Waynesboro CDBG Entitlement Community Annual Action Plan for the federal fiscal year 2020, authorizing staff to file the plan with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Mr. Jude.
Thank you. I've already spoken on CDBG several times, so I'm not going to go through the entire presentation. Just to reiterate my presentation from the last council meeting of the proposed action plan, and you've got a briefing on it in your agenda packet tonight. Again, we've got an extra infusion of COVID money into the CDBG money this year, which is to be used for COVID-related response. So that's this third item here on my graph. The items, again, we've been trying to concentrate our use of CDBG money in different neighborhoods each year. This year, we wanted to do something in the basic city area. And so we're proposing, and we currently have our on-call consultant, McCormick and Taylor, trying to design a potential sidewalk project around 4th Street and try to create a safer crossing of Delphine Avenue. It is expensive to build sidewalk, expensive to build infrastructure like that. So I don't know how much of it we'll be able to do, but we've allocated $108,000 in this years to that project. With the section of the money, again, it's 30% that we use in our slums and blight commercial area, which is downtown. And so with that money, we are proposing to complete some of the improvements at the Market Avenue parking lot, which has been renovated recently. And then to also begin to put together a plan to improve the stormwater drainage underneath the Leggett building. We currently have a collapsed storm sewer pipe that's inhibiting redevelopment in that area. And then with the money that we've received through the CARES Act, obviously 20%, the bottom has to go to grant administration through the Waynesboro Housing and Redevelopment Authority. But then the additional CARES Act money, we are proposing to, first of all, use to provide 3 months of emergency financial assistance for households with unpaid or delinquent mortgages, rent, and utility expenses. That'll be facilitated again by social services, since they have the capacity and the experience in doing income means testing. To supplement small business loans to local businesses affected by the COVID-19 shutdown. And, we already have a lot of money in our small business response fund in the regular CARES Act, but we're just going to continue to supplement that. And then as well, a one-time grant to homeless organizations to defray their operating expenses and support capital improvements. And again, we already have a much larger appropriation out of the regular CARES Act money to a homeless response as well. But we'll use some of the CDBG money as well. So that is the program that we are asking for approval for.
Anyone have questions for Mr. Jude? All right, here are no questions. I'm going to hereby open the public hearing. And just like before public hearing, you can call 844-844-9200. When prompted, you'll enter the meeting access code 398145, followed by the pound sign. You will hear Q&A session has started. You will enter star, followed by the number 6. You will hear, if you would like to speak, please press 1 at that time, press 1. While you're waiting, you'll hear an audio feed of the meeting. Public hearing is now open. Any callers, Mr. Shaw?
We've got a couple of callers in a waiting room. They haven't entered the queue just as of yet. If you can give us
okay.
just give it just another second here, sir, that if there are any callers that are listening, that are currently on the line and would like to comment on the community development block grant, then you'll want to enter the queue. No, sir. It doesn't look like we have any public comment on the CDBG program.
Okay. With that, I'll close the public hearing on this matter and ask for a motion to adopt this resolution.
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Allen made the motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
And Mr. Short seconded the motion. Is there any discussion? All in favor of this resolution, please signify by saying aye and show of hands. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Item number 7 is to consider introducing 2 ordinances, one amending the restating Article 1 and Chapter 18 of the Building Code and Building Regulations, and one is to adopt Article 3 of Chapter 18 and Article 5 of Chapter 78 regarding taxation. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the first revisions to Chapter 18, Articles 1 and 2 are primarily to simplify and clarify the existing language in the ordinance, and then the revisions to Chapter 18, Article 3 of Buildings and Regulations and Chapter 78, Article 11, and the taxation code are new additions to the code that are primarily meant to help to deal with blighted or derelict structures or properties in the city. Within Articles 1 and 2 of Chapter 18, some of the things that I might highlight, one would be that there is some clarity given as to the enabling legislation of the code, that the City of Waynesboro adopts the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code. And so we've reduced some of the language because many of the other references that are currently in the ordinance are either outdated or redundant. That once you adopt the building code and we also adopt the maintenance code with that, then that's a little more clear. 2 is that there are updated references to civil penalties versus criminal penalties. That one of the changes would be to change some of the language as applies to dangerous structures to actually be a civil penalty. And part of that is because we feel like that it is actually easier to pursue resolution through a civil charge than it is through a criminal charge. There's some language that makes clear that the city manager appoints a building official. We obviously do that currently in practice, but this codifies that requirement. And as I say, most of the changes to Articles 1 and 2, we would consider more or less code updates for housekeeping purpose and to be consistent with Virginia code. The revisions or additions of Chapter 18, Article 3, and then Chapter 78, Article 11 are more substantial, and they provide what the city staff and our legal counsel believes will be some additional tools in trying to address blighted properties and derelict structures. A blighted property is any individual commercial, industrial, or residential structure or improvement that endangers the public health, safety, or welfare because of its dilapidation or deterioration, and that it begins to violate minimum health and safety standards. And then a derelict building is one, whether constructed or in some partial state of construction, that endangers the public health, safety, and welfare for a period continuously of in excess of 6 months, that the building is vacant, that it has been boarded up in accordance with applicable provisions of the Virginia Uniform Statewide Building Code, and that is not lawfully connected to electric service from a utility provider or water and sewer services. In either case, currently we have dealt with these properties either as nuisances, that if there is a specific nuisance that we can cite on a property, and those tend to be things like high grass or standing water, trash and rubbish, those kinds of things, they're dealt with under Chapter 38 of the code, or we deal with derelict structures under the Virginia Maintenance Code, but there's a limit to our ability to bring some of those structures into greater conformity with neighborhood standards. And what happens is oftentimes the building official or the property owner will have a vacant structure boarded up and secured, but unless the structure is unsafe, then that's as far as our ordinances allow us to go. And by unsafe, that would be a structure where physical collapse of the structure becomes a concern, that a roof is deteriorated, or the foundation or something that's a structural element of the structure or the building has gotten to a state of deterioration where collapse is a concern, or where it can no longer be secured. And so that you have nuisance behavior, that people are breaking into the building and that it can no longer be boarded up. And in those cases, if it is unsafe, then the city can step forward, and we generally demolish a couple of those types of structures every year. But a building that's simply boarded up and standing vacant could stand in that condition for some years. And this ordinance would allow us some ability to step forward. Now, there's certainly some overlap with a derelict structure and a blighted property, but what you'll find is that generally all derelict structures are also blighted, but not all blighted properties would be considered derelict under the standard of the ordinance. That you could have a building that's still occupied but is would be considered blighted, or that is connected to utilities but still would be considered blighted. So what the ordinance outlines, simply stated, for blighted property, the city has to make a determination that the property has created blight in its setting, that it's at a state of deterioration or dilapidation where it's causing a threat to the general public health, safety, and welfare. We would send a notice and give the owner 30 days to propose a plan to correct the blight within some reasonable period of time. If the owner fails to respond, then the city staff would bring the property to the city council and ask that the city council would declare the property blighted. And at that point, the city could prepare a plan of action. We could carry out the plan, and that those costs to the city would be chargeable to the owner and could be collected in the same manner in which we collect taxes. And generally that means against the value of the property with a lien or something of that nature. In extreme cases, the city could request that the property be placed in a court-ordered receivership, or even attempt to declare eminent domain so that we could take possession of the property, correct problems, and sell it to recover our cost. The reason to go into receivership is to ensure that there's some agreement that the court is supervising as to the improvements that ought to and need to be made, so that you don't end up ultimately in a dispute with an owner about improvements that the city might have made, and the owner could contest that those improvements weren't necessary for the public health and safety, that they didn't reduce endangerment. And then, of course, eminent domain, no one would take lightly, that you still have to prove that there is a compelling public interest in trying to attempt to confiscate the property to recover city's cost. Otherwise, oftentimes those costs, as it stands now when we demolish structures, exist as liens against the property. With derelict structures, the process is a little bit different, that after a determination that the property is derelict and that we've provided the owner notice of such, that the owner has 90 days to develop a plan to address those items that endanger the public health, safety, and welfare. And failure to submit the plan could result in fines, that the city would levy a fine of $500 a month for each month that that the property remains without a plan for compliance. That the city, if or when that we do receive a plan for the owner, then the city is bound to expedite a review and to reduce or completely waive fees that are associated with either building permitting fees or other improvement or fees that are associated with other improvements. As well, the code requires that if we adopt this provision, that the property owner becomes eligible for a tax abatement program, and I'll discuss that in a second. Now, just like blighted properties, if the owner fails to submit a plan, then the city can step in and correct the issues that create an endangerment to the public. And then we would, again, levy those charges against the property. In this particular step, there isn't a necessity to bring the issue to the city council. It's dealt with administratively, primarily through the building official's office and the city manager's office. With the derelict structure provision, an owner could request that their property be declared as derelict. And the reason that an owner might do that, it would be to take advantage of potential tax abatement. The way the tax abatement works, and these are the provisions that are outlined in Chapter 78, is that a request would be made to the city tax assessor to assess the property in its current condition. And typically with these properties, they'll be whatever the current tax assessment is, because improvements haven't been occurring, market values not improving for the properties, but nonetheless, a current assessment has to be made. Once either demolition or improvements are completed, the assessor would be asked back to reassess the property. So in the case of demolition, the value of tax abatement is the actual cost of demolition. In the case of improvements, the abatement is for the incremental increase in the fair market value of the property. And the code allows, the state code allows that this can run for a period of between 5 and 15 years. We've proposed 10 years. At some level, you want to give enough years so that there's some incentive to owners to take advantage of the abatement and to correct the problem. But you don't want it to be so long that you're foregoing taxes that might otherwise be collected. So a couple of examples of how that might work. If you have, for instance, a $30,000 piece of property and half of that value is in land, and these are real examples, that you have a $15,000 house sitting on a $15,000 piece of land as a derelict structure, and demolition, is going to cost somewhere between generally $10,000 or $15,000. We'll assume $10,000 demolition. The annual tax burden then, once that house is gone, is $135. And so the owner has a credit, so to speak, of $10,000 in his demolition cost. And I've heard legal counsel refer to it as a coupon, that each year for a period of 10 years, the owner would basically have a tax-free or would not have a tax burden because they have a $10,000 demolition coupon. So they're able to continue to take advantage of that unless the land value increased dramatically. But at any rate, the idea is that you're giving them a tax abatement of the value of that demolition at $10,000. So that same property, though, let's say that another person came along and bought the property. The tax abatement is running with the land. So if a person built, say, a $170,000 house, and the value, taxable value then of the land and the improvement are $185,000, then they're under our current tax rate, their tax burden is $1,665 a year. Well, they still have the $10,000 abatement credit, so to speak. And so they would be able to take advantage of that until either the abatement or the credit for abatement from demolition is expired or the 10 years expires. I'll give you a different example. Again, these are realistic examples, but let's say you have a property that's valued at $35,000 with a large brick structure, a non-residential structure, and the value of that structure, is still fairly light. Let's say the total taxable value of $150,000, but then the demolition cost could be $75,000. Well, the demolition costs are going to exceed the taxable value of the property. And in that case, there's little money to be made. There's little value there. And I think I highlight that just simply to say that if we were to step forward with demolition in that environment, in that scenario, then we may not recover the cost of demolition. And that may be something that would be necessary for the public health, safety, and welfare. And it may be something that we would choose to do to improve a specific neighborhood or community. But my point is, in that particular example, to highlight that sometimes you have a property where the cost of demolishing the building will be greater than the underlying value of land. I'll give you a third example that's more one that maybe is taken from the page of community development. In this example, you have a taxable value of building land of $150,000. So the annual taxes on that property are $1,350. A renovation takes place and brings the property value to almost $3 million. So the incremental difference in tax value in that case is between the $150,000 original tax, the post-renovation tax of $3 million, or $2,850,000. So in that scenario, the city is going to abate $25,650 in taxes. So the annual tax assessment would be $27,000, and the city would be abating $25,650. And so the reason I'm highlighting these is to say that there is some cost to the city in foregone taxes. And in many communities, that cost is one that the community takes on because it's worth it to the community to see that building renovated. And so, and this is not dissimilar to what communities sometimes do, and in fact, even Waynesboro does in economic development incentive programs, where we recognize that improvement, that new construction or the renovated building is of such value to the community and wouldn't occur otherwise, that we're willing to rebate, or in this case, abate the taxes that otherwise would accrue to us. Because in some cases, those are the types of incentives that are necessary to realize the renovation or the improvement or the demolition of an eyesore. Again, I would note that the city staff, the legal staff feel like these are worthwhile tools. They're tools that other localities take on with some success. I would say that they're not a cure-all, that we know where a number of these properties exist, and either because of our staff resources, it's labor intensive to go through this, or the general conditions and ownership of the property, that we would probably have to work through the properties that would be considered derelict in some sort of an orderly fashion, much as we're cleaning up inoperable vehicles. And that there are some mechanical things that need to be put in place. There's a fair amount of coordination between the building official's office, the tax assessor's office, and the commissioner of revenue to make this a successful program. And we're working right now to try to work out the mechanics of it. But we certainly think that these are worthwhile amendments and additions to the code. As an aside, I mentioned inoperable vehicles, and I know in one of our previous meetings we talked about the number of vehicles that we had cited and removed at that point in time. That was right before the pandemic. Dr. Hostetter had asked for a periodic update. So I'll give you an update that at present, we have opened up a little more than 180 cases, inoperable vehicle cases. Some of those are for multiple vehicles on one property. And we have more than 120 vehicles that have been moved. And most of those have been moved voluntarily. We have levied some civil penalties, and we've had about a half a dozen or so vehicles towed, but most of the ones that have been moved with cooperation of the offending property owner. Turning back to the matter at hand, again, the ordinance has been prepared for the council's consideration. You actually have 2 ordinances to consider. And I might ask that if Ms. Michelson has anything to add, it was actually she and her colleague, Mr. Bowman, who developed the ordinances for us in coordination with the building official. So I'd be remiss if I didn't allow her any comments that she might have.
Thank you, Jim. I think you did an excellent job explaining the programs and then the purpose behind those programs. I just would like to echo Mr. Shaw's sentiments regarding that, you know, these are tools that the Virginia Code allows localities to adopt, and they're in the Virginia Code, but until and unless the locality adopts their own ordinances, the localities can't use the ordinances in the Virginia Code. So we would need to take this necessary step to give Waynesboro these options, you know, to use in the future against certain properties. And it is a process, and I am involved in it in another locality, and it's not overnight, but I strongly believe and recommend that, you know, these ordinances will benefit the city overall. And we've crafted the ordinances to give Waynesboro as much flexibility as we can provide with staying within the confines of what the Virginia Code allows us to do. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions anyone may have. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Shaw or Ms. Michelson?
One quick question, Jim. Can we use CDBG funds to recover our demolition costs?
That if you were to prepare, you know, as part of your annual plan or an amendment to your plan, and you're working in low to moderate income neighborhood, then yes. And in fact, we've done one demolition so far with CDBG money. Now, one caution that I would have is just that if you use CDBG money, that there's an elaborate process to go through for an environmental and cultural review of the property in question. So the property that we demolished was in an historic neighborhood, and so the requirement for that review included coordination with Virginia Department of Historic Resources, and the review itself took about 6 or 8 months. And so it's one of those things you want to plan pretty far ahead if you're going to do that. You know, it's not something that you would do in retrospect. In other words, you couldn't tear down the building and then go ask for CDBG funds to deal with it. And you would want to plan far enough in advance. But it would be certainly viable if we were doing some sort of a overall neighborhood renovation. And in this case, we were actually doing a housing rehab and, you know, on a property immediately adjacent to the one that was demolished. But there was the property that was demolished had already been declared an unsafe structure. It had a roof collapse. And so it was, as far as our local regulation, easier. As far as the use of CDBG funds, more difficult.
That just offers up the thing that I talk about every year, but, you know, maybe that conversation of not this year, but maybe next year of having a discussion about pivoting off of the entitlement program, and maybe this could be a plan. I'd love to chat more offline, but maybe to explore opportunities where maybe we might be able to get a grant through the PDC or others to help facilitate the identification of properties and targeted neighborhoods that are ripe for assistance and a hand up that could provide some opportunities across the city. So thank you.
We'd be happy to do that, Mr. Short. In fact, the city keeps a running list of properties that are currently boarded up, that have been vacant, that, you know, are secured either by the city's initiative or the property owner's initiative. So I think we could certainly facilitate that conversation.
That'd be great. I'm going to hit you up on that this week, Jim.
Very good.
Any other questions?
Not so much a question, but I think a comment that, you know, in hearing the language, you know, there are some harsh terms in there, but I think, you know, this is the answer that when many constituents ask me, why can't you do something about that building? Why can't you do something about that place that's fallen apart? These are going to be some of the answers to incentivize, you know, people who already own the property to be able to make those improvements, you know, encourage them to do so. But if not, then be able to take the action that I think we all would like to see to make some improvements. So I would say it's a positive thing, as Ms. Michelson has said. It gives us more tools in our toolkit to hopefully turn some of these properties around. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to ask for two motions to introduce ordinance amending and restating Articles 1 and Articles 2 of Chapter 18. That'll be the first motion. Do we have a motion to introduce this article?
I will make that motion.
Thank you, Sam. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Terry. This motion will be heard on August 24th at our next regular business meeting. Now, the second ordinance is is there a motion to introduce an ordinance adopting Article 3 and Article 11 of Chapter 78?
Was it Article 3, Chapter 18 and Article 11 of Chapter 78?
It says adopting Article 3 and Article 11 of Chapter 78.
It's actually Article 3 of Chapter 18 and Article 11 of Chapter 78.
Okay.
I'll make that motion.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Bruce. Bruce seconded that. You can't hear him, but he seconded it. And is there any discussion? Okay, both of these motions will be heard on our regular business meeting of August 24th. That brings us to item number 8, which is to consider adopting an ordinance appropriating funds from the Virginia Tourism Corporation grant in the amount of $12,752 to the general fund to reimburse advertising expenditures in the tourism department. Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, members of council, the ordinance definition there is pretty self-explanatory. If unless there are questions from council.
No questions? I'm not sure we take a vote on this one.
It's we can adopt tonight. We're receiving funds, I'm told, so if the notes don't indicate as much, we can adopt actually this ordinance this evening. So if a motion to adopt and a second, some discussion, and then a vote would be ideal.
Okay. All right, so do we have a motion to adopt the money for the tourism grant?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Terry. Do we have a second? All right, thank you, Bruce. We have a first and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
That's a 5-0 vote. Thank you. Item number 9, we've taken off the agenda tonight. We'll move on to item number 10. Item number 10 is to consider introducing an ordinance appropriating $200,000 from the CARES Act to the general fund for distribution to Valley Community Service Board for homeless population to mitigate COVID-19 effects and enable compliance with COVID health precautions. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, you're well aware that the city initially received a bit more than $1.9 million in CARES relief funds. And then more recently, we received a second allocation of equal amounts, so that we've received $3,948,760. The CARES money is specifically meant to address the effects of the pandemic. And so we have to use the expenditures that are ones incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. Were not accounted for in the budget most recently approved as of March 27th, 2020. And the expenditures must be incurred during the period between March 1st, 2020 and December 30th, 2020. One of the provisions of the CARE Act specifically references providing assistance to homeless populations who are particularly vulnerable during the pandemic. The council originally made an appropriation of $50,000 to the Valley Community Services Board for their efforts to address homelessness here in Waynesboro. And we're proposing that we would provide an additional $200,000 to Valley Community Service Board to address homeless problems here in Waynesboro.
Are there any questions for Mr. Shaw?
I'll make a motion to introduce the ordinance.
Okay, we have a motion introduced by Mr. Short to introduce this ordinance. Do we have a second?
I will second that motion.
Dr. Hofstadter, thank you, sir. We have a second. Is there any discussion?
Well, I would bring to highlight, some of the discussion that some of our public comments were before, that, there are funds that are needed and are being used for some of the most vulnerable here in the community. And so again, this is an illustration of how that CARES money is being funneled towards some of those efforts that we need to undertake. So I'm glad to see that happening.
Thank you, Dr. Hofstadter. All right, this ordinance will be considered again at our August 24th regular business meeting. Item number 11. Item number 11 is consider introducing an ordinance appropriating $150,000 in CARES funds to the General Fund for distribution to the Economic Development Authority for administration of nonprofit sustainability program. Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, these are the same CARES Act monies that we just discussed. These monies are proposed to be used to create a nonprofit sustainability fund. This fund would operate much as the grants to local businesses, small business fund that we refer to as the Renaissance funds. The eligibility requirements to be able to access the funds would be, one is that these are for nonprofit organizations as described by Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code. And so these are tax exempt organizations. They would have to have suffered a qualified business interruption due to COVID-19, and that they have a physical location within the corporate limits of Waynesboro, that they have not received or not been awarded reimbursement under any other federal program for expenses that they're asking to be reimbursed for now. So in other words, if they received federal PPP money, that's payroll protection funds, then they would not be able to apply for payroll assistance under this program, but they could apply for other types of expenditures for which they've not received federal grant funding or an insurance reimbursement. And that we would consider a qualified business interruption as the suspension of business that was in response to the governor's executive orders for public health emergency, or that they've incurred increased costs due to COVID prevention measures, that is putting PPE in place and that sort of thing, or that they've had some sort of a cost because of local economic injury to local citizens, that if they're a provider of human services in the community and they've seen an uptick in their service provision, then they would be able to apply for these funds. or that they've had some sort of a disruption to something that's critical to their supply chain or their business network generally. The types of eligible uses are much like the ones that were listed in the small business grant program: personal protective equipment or supplies that promote public health and safety, technology to be able to conduct business virtually, professional services that are related to either construction or the design, alterations of the built environment necessary to promote physical and social distancing, initial cleaning or disinfection for services prior to their reopening, actual expenses related to canceled events. If there were funds that were expended to promote event or book acts or whatever it may be, and then they were canceled because of the governor's order, those expenses could be recovered. Rent, mortgage costs, utility cost, and there is a provision that the funds must simply be expended in compliance with state or federal laws.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Do we have any questions for Mr. Shaw?
I do have a question, Mr. Shaw. Where is this information going to be? Where will these groups be contacting the city to apply for these funds?
The funds will be available through the Economic Development Authority. So the Economic Development Office will be running this. We'll begin, if this is approved, then we'll begin to advertise the application process. It'll be online. We'll make, put out notice as we did with the small business community. There are much fewer number of nonprofits in the locality than there are businesses. So we will probably be able to reach out to individual nonprofits as well. And we have a list of those nonprofits.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, do we have a motion to introduce this ordinance?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Dr. Hofstadter. This ordinance will be considered at our August 24th meeting.
Mr. Mayor, if I might interject, I think we've had good success. Appreciate staff's bringing this to our attention this evening. And we had good success with the for-profit, the first round of the Renaissance grant program, and would offer and extend for council's consideration this evening, perhaps asking staff to bring forward a second round of Renaissance grant opportunities at maybe a $15,000 cap for our next meeting for for-profit entities to further help our business community. If there's a general consensus or otherwise.
We'd certainly be glad to do that, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody object to that?
No, I think it's important to see what other businesses might need further funds at this point.
Agreed. So if you guys would prepare that would be great.
We will do so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
And this brings us to item number 12. And item number 12 is an update for reopening our city plan. Mr. Hamp.
So yes, sir, Mr. Mayor and members of council, again, acknowledging some of the communication and concern we received this evening from our constituents, and understanding some general guidance provided by council and their desire to resume meeting in person. Staff intends to plan for a resumption of live and in-person meetings with the City Council on August 24th with our regular business meeting there. I think it would be important to communicate to council and the public who would like to generally be aware or who might intend on attending when we resume, is that we would plan to be very structured and careful. We will be regulating according to occupancy of the building, the attendance at the council meeting, what we believe will be how many individuals we can accommodate in the council chambers at a safe distance. So attendance will be limited in that regard. And if we reach that capacity, we'll be making plans and provisions for individuals to attend, but be socially distanced and safe in the corridor. And we'll figure out a way to manage. If those individuals wish to speak, we'll have to do some management in terms of how we usher people in and keep safe occupancy and safe social distancing. We agree we want to take care and precaution with the health and safety of the council and our staff who are obligated to participate in these meetings. And two, take care and take health precaution with the public who would be attending the meeting, either out of obligation with business before the council or as a matter of just general interest in wishing to communicate or watch the council conduct business. I think we will be, again, enforcing those now commonly known precautionary measures of social distancing, and individuals attending the meeting can expect to encounter a staffed entrance and a health screen as we enter the building as well. So that's our plan for resuming open public council meetings, and I think we'll be working to gradually restore open business at the Yancey building and other buildings as conditions and need warrant. One piece of a new development in that regard is the treasurer is inquiring about the ability to restore the second lane or establish a second lane of drive-through service with her office. I mean, residents of Waynesboro who recall when this facility was a bank, there were 2, if not 3 lanes through which you could conduct business. I think in part anticipating that we'll have an increase in traffic as we resume cutoffs for utilities, but also recognizing the success that the office has had in drive-through business. She thinks that will be an improvement both for her staff and for service to the public. And so we're working on that. And also, we really will be taking a look at our facilities in terms of what type of business and program and service is delivered and whether direct access is required or whether direct access improves the level and quality of service we deliver. We will be continuing to emphasize to the public, again, for their benefit and that of our staff, if it's possible to conduct business by phone or online, we certainly would encourage that. If it's not possible, we can make accommodation and have been arranging for personal meetings that are appropriately socially distanced when necessary. And so I would not anticipate, just to give, I think people enjoy and appreciate more specific information, I do not see the Yancey building opening prior to Labor Day, but perhaps soon thereafter.
Thank you, Mr. Hamp. And I just want to reiterate, Council's been talking with staff about reopening and having live meetings. The issue we have is that the space that we meet in has a smaller occupancy rate. And once you factor in social distancing, the number of people plus staff and council in a room is not that great. And that's the reason we chose to stay live on Zoom until now. And looking forward to our August 24th meeting. Thank you, Mr. Hamp.
Yes, sir. My pleasure.
Okay, with that, we come to item number 14, and I think we've covered this once, but I'm going to open it up one more time. Our citizen comment period. If you're still listening and you want to make a comment, now is the time by calling 844-844-920. When the line is answered, you'll enter the access code of 398145, followed by the pound sign. You will hear question and answer session has started. You'll press the star and the number 6. When you're asked to speak, you'll press number 1 and you'll be put in queue. And once you're in queue, you'll hear the audio feed of the meeting. When it's your turn to speak, the moderator will tell you it's time for you to speak and you can participate. Again, this is a citizen comment period. Counselors will not be answering questions. This is your chance to speak to us.
Mr. Mayor, I believe we do have a caller on the line.
All right, caller, if you can hear us.
Looks like they're in the waiting room. *6 would get the caller in the queue. Hold on just a second. Okay.
Yes, my name is Gala Carter. I spoke once, but I would like to respond to the gentleman's comment earlier. If all your constituents were satisfied with what you were doing, then someone could say you're doing a great job. As of right now, you all are not doing a great job. You all are not being transparent. You're being transparent maybe perhaps with some, but not with all. It was nice to stay on and to hear about the little bit of money that you offered to the homeless, and 50,000, it might have been 20,000, but that's very little compared to what you are offering to give people vehicles to drive that already have vehicles to drive. That's like asking a hungry person while you're sitting eating a steak and a full 4-course meal, and you ask them if you want a piece of your bread. That's offering them nothing. That's pennies on the dollar, not even that. That's the constituents should be able to see where the funds is going. It should be very transparent, and it should be based on the citizens. It should not be on policing. I'm going to say that again. You're not being transparent. You're not helping the community. Again, you're helping some, but you need to also be helping your people of color, your poorer citizens, whether black, white, orange, purple, yellow, and the ones that are in need. Offering a little piece of bread to a hungry man may feed him for a second, but it's not going to get him full. And it should be about making sure everyone is full. Everyone should be feeling like we're all part of this and this together. We all voted you in or not voted for you, but you're there now. So your job is to serve us as a community. Again, I'm asking that we look into some kind of internet service for the children in the area to help them. I'm asking that we provide for the people that need, and that we make sure that we take care of our citizens. Again, one person speaking, saying that you're doing a good job when you're really not. You could tell by her voice it just isn't a good thing to do. Or the people. It's just not. It's unfair that you all do this. It's unfair that every single time an item comes on that you all know that we're going to be wanting it, that people of color are coming in there to speak about, you all take it off the agenda. That's why we can say you're not being transparent. If the original plan was to take it off the agenda, then you should have said that at the beginning of the meeting, or you should have notified people prior to the meeting. You waited until you seen who all was there, or you all could see your numbers, and then you all decided to pull it off the agenda. That is rude. That's a slap in the face. That's saying that we are nobodies and we don't matter. And that's just not the way it is. And if you all need us to stand up and shout like other cities are doing to show you that we do matter and that we do have voices and that we will have people standing behind our backs, we can do that as well. It should not never have to come to this city going into those type of stands to ask and beg and plead for you all to do your job and to be transparent with all your citizens and to do things that benefit all your citizens. The extra policing, as the lady said, you all were already aware of the things going on, not just in the state of Virginia, not just in the city of Waynesboro, but across America as a whole, and you're okay with that. Knowing that people are asking that we stop giving extra police cars. That's what defunding the police is about. It's about stop providing extra things while there's people out here who still need the simple things. We should not be providing someone air conditioning and not even telling other people to open their windows. It's just not something that should be done. If we stand before God, that shouldn't be done. We should be securing everybody. We should be securing everything to make sure that all children are eating, all children have a home, a roof. Again, you all are offering little bits of nothing to the common people. Meantime, you're offering great supplies to others. It's just, you got to do better. We got to do better as a humanity. We've got to do better as a people. No matter the color of our skin or what we stand for or what our politics are about, we all have to be better as a people for our kids to have better, for our grandkids to have better, for the world to just be a better place. Like I say again, there's people out here asking to defund the police. We didn't come together asking for that. All we asked for is for everybody to communicate. And right now, not to continue, but that's just not where the funding is needed, not with what is going on in America, not with what's going on in Virginia, and definitely not with what's going on in Waynesboro. And if you're unaware of how many people are still hungry, how many people are still needing homes, how many people are staying in these nasty hotels that you all have open and running that are just full of nothing, if you all are unaware of that, then, and those people probably the children need to eat because the parents aren't worried about it, then you need to get out in your communities and you need to look better, not just on Tiffany Drive, not just over by the country club, but you need to go around the whole Waynesboro. You really need to be out with your constituents and finding out what are the needs, because these children need to eat, they need to learn. And while we appreciate you all coming back in the office on the 24th, while you're talking about the space that you all are provided, you all are asking our children to go in. Mine aren't, but you're asking people to send their children into classrooms.
Hey, caller.
Yes.
Can you wind her down? Your time's up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sure. I thank you for showing how uncourteous you were to me, but how courteous you were to the man who spoke. Just the way you spoke to him. Yes, sir. You could have said ma'am, not caller, because you said sir to him. Those little things that you all do shows how much you all do not appreciate and consider us. And thank you for showing me who you are. I don't know who exactly spoke just now, but I will look into it. But thank you for having manners with the white man that spoke and calling me caller, not ma'am. But from now on, it's ma'am from Mrs. Carter. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comment.
That just shows who y'all are. That showed exactly who they were.
Okay. Anyone else, Mr. Shaw?
Mr. Mayor, we don't have another caller.
Okay. With that, it's item number 16 is our motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Is there a second? All right. Thank you, Mr. Allen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Meeting's adjourned.
Have a great night.